That's a little too snug, so I'm going to give myself an extra thousandth. I could probably force it in there, but there's no need to do that. So I'm going to take another thousandth either side and give me enough room so this thing will just slide together. There's really no reason to make life difficult when you can just take another minute and take another pass. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's just take a minute to look at the fits that we've obtained with these cuts. Now you can see that that rosewood finger fits very closely into the groove that we cut in the cherry. I can slide them together, but it takes a little bit of effort to push and slide those two. That's exactly the kind of fit that we want to have, because when it's cemented together, we don't want any of these seams to show. We want it to look as if there's no space at all between any of these parts. And then if we look at the fit of the cherry into the groove in the rosewood, have a similar fit, slides into there, slides down, and it'll slide very, very, very tight inside that groove, so that when we put these pieces together, both of the tongues and both of the grooves will seat at the same time, and the fit that we'll have will be very, very tight. We'll take a look at that after it's glued together and see how well we did. Well, I've removed the sacrificial softwood from the bottom of the rosewood. This is the way it looks with the rosewood cemented to the bottom of the handle. You can see we have a good tight fit along the rosewood, up along the point, along the top, all four sides. This will look even better when it's cleaned up. But this is the kind of accuracy that is required at this step so that the tamper handle looks really precise when it's finished. Just to recap what the next few cuts are intended to accomplish, I dropped the cutter down to the cherry finger that sticks up from the bottom. I dropped it down to right there, and I backed it up 1/8. So that's going to establish the 1/8 of an inch rosewood border. I'll level off the top of the rosewood finger, then we'll move fore and aft and drop down another 1/8, which will leave us a 1/8 rosewood border around this finger, and then we'll cut a 1/8, or rather a 1/60 groove, and the whole thing will tie together in a nice little puzzle when we're finished. Well, we're almost finished with the cuts for the joinery in the bottom of the handle. This established the rosewood finger that'll come up into the cherry for the top of the handle. Let's just set that on there. You see we have a nice fit there that comes up into the top of the handle. Now we just need to cut the groove for this cherry finger to come down into the rosewood, and we can glue this puppy together and move on to the top of the handle. And now we're ready to cut the final groove in the rosewood border. This groove will be 1/4 of an inch deep, and it'll come through the rosewood finger that extends downward into the bottom of the handle. This is a 1/8 bit, and I need a 160 thousandths wide groove. So I'm going to make my pass, and instead of going out to the full 160, I'm going to keep it a little bit tight and then trial fit the cherry finger down into that groove, because I really want the finger and the border to be as tight as they possibly can when this handle is machined into its finished diameter, which will be back in here somewhere. That's the kind of fit that we need to make the joints disappear. This kind of joinery is so much fun to do because there's a low level of stress. All of these cuts are linear cuts, right angles, and there's as long as the arithmetic is done correctly for the height, the length, and so forth, there's almost no way to make a mistake and go wrong. It's time well spent to double check your arithmetic and to add up all of the moves, but you'll see when we're finished cementing this together and turning it on the lathe to diameter, keep in mind down here, this is in the neck at the bottom of the tamper handle, and this part of the handle, because it's so narrow, we will have moved in beyond all of the defects in this piece of rosewood and the slight bit of tear out that exists from the cuts. This is a very old and brittle piece of wood. You'll see that the closeness of this fit, it will be evident when it's machined that a lot of care was taken to make these cuts. And that's the way I recommend that you do it if you want to do this kind of trim work in your tamper handles or your pool cues if you're making cues. This is all the same kind of joinery that you can translate into any kind of decorative piece of wood turning. So I'm going to cement this together, and then we'll move on to putting the cut in the top and putting the stitched ring in there. And when we get to that point, we'll be getting pretty darn close to finished. Let's take a look at this handle blank so far, now that it's been joined together and turned around on the lathe. As we discussed from the beginning, the alignment of the grain in the wood it's not an accidental result that the grain aligns all the way around the handle. It's something that you have to premeditate when you begin the project and plan it all the way through to be that way. The next step is to cut a ring from this billet, a stitched ring of rosewood and cherry, and insert that stitched ring at the proper location in the top of the handle. We know that the handle length from bottom to top is going to be a particular dimension, and where the handle is at its very widest right here, that's where the stitched ring has to be inserted. So I'm going to make my measurements, determine the distance from here to here, make a cut on the table saw with a kerf that will exactly match the width of the height of the stitched ring that I'm going to insert in there. And then I'm going to bore the center of the stitched ring, and I'm going to bore the top half and the bottom half of this handle top so that I can insert the dowel inside here to align the top, the ring, and the bottom all along the wide part of this handle. Well, I finished boring and preparing the three parts for the top of the handle, so I'd like to focus on that now, and we can finish this project, and you can see how the trickery that's involved to keep the top of the handle aligned and in the relationship that we want it. Let's take a look at these parts. I have the trim ring cut from the billet. I have the dowel cut. Now this fit of the dowel through the trim ring That's a really tight sliding fit. You don't want any slop in there because the trim ring and the two halves of the top of the handle need to be located very precisely with each other. The dowel has a hole drilled through the center. That's to relieve any glue pressure that might build up behind it when the parts are clamped together. It also has a series of score marks or grooves down the side of the dowel. These are to allow any glue that accumulates as the dowel is pushed in on the sides to allow that glue to escape and come back by the dowel. It also gives a little bit more surface area for the glue to connect to, but I don't really know if that's important. It's just sort of a traditional thing. This is the top of the handle, and as you can see, I've separated it into two halves, and I've bored the halves to accommodate the dowel. The top half of the tamper handle, there's only a short distance before the top of the handle, so the dowel can't go very far into the top. I recessed it 3/8 of an inch in there, and this dowel again is a nice tight sliding fit into the top of the handle. The same quality of fit exists in the bottom of the handle top. So that means that what we have is a set of 3 parts that we can slide together line up as if the piece was never separated. So that's the trickery that's involved. You probably know from watching, oh well, maybe you have, maybe you don't know. I have a video explaining how I put the brass weights inside the handles. So if you had watched that video, then you would know that I drill and bore from the bottom of the handle enough distance up into the top to insert a brass weight into the handle. The existence of this maple dowel inside the top of the handle doesn't make any difference at all, because I'm going to bore through that when I put the weight into the handle. This is just a way of allowing me to organize these parts so that accurate and effective gluing is possible. Now I'm going to glue these 3 parts together, and the next time we see this tamper, it will probably be finished. I don't imagine anyone would be interested in seeing how I shape it to the handle size, because that's really very basic lathe work, and it's pretty boring to do, and I think it would be pretty boring to watch. These finger joints, they'll come closer together as the bottom of this handle is turned smaller and smaller. They'll always be 90 degrees apart. No matter how small the handle gets, the pattern will always look as if it had been joined into the handle at the diameter that the handle is in that location. Let's take a look at the finished tamper handle and see how these finger joints came out. You'll notice that the cherry and the rosewood finger joints all look very nice and tight. It's impossible to find any sign of a seam in between these pieces of rosewood and cherry. That's because we made the cuts in these at exactly the same size, with 1/1000th of an inch clearance between each of these pieces of wood. The stitch ring at the top sets off nicely, and I added an additional rosewood button in the cap of this tamper handle. The whole thing actually came out very nice, and it's one of the satisfying ends to a project that happens every now and then. Well, it was lots of fun making these videos on the cherry and rosewood tamper handle. I have a lot more ideas in progress down in the shop, so if you'd like to see more of this kind of work, I hope you'll subscribe to take a look at future videos. This is Dana Paul saying thanks for watching.